The scene of a disturbed visitor at Baker Street is a quintessential opening in many Sherlock Holmes stories, establishing mystery, tension, and the brilliant deductive mind of the great detective. This narrative trope typically unfolds with an unexpected arrival, someone in a state of distress, bearing a case so perplexing or urgent that only Holmes can unravel it. The atmosphere is set with a late night or stormy evening, the dim glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the sitting room at 221B. Dr. Watson, perhaps reading the paper or writing notes, is interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson announces the visitor with a tone of concern and instrides a figure, often a gentleman of high standing, though sometimes a desperate commoner, whose disheveled appearance and agitated demeanor immediately signal trouble. The visitor, sometimes hesitant, sometimes breathless with urgency, spills out a tale of inexplicable events. A disappearance, a theft, a threat, or an uncanny occurrence that defies ordinary explanation. Holmes, reclining in his chair with fingers steepled, listens with rapt attention, his sharp eyes missing nothing. The mud on the visitor's boots, the tremor in their hands, the way they avoid certain details. Watson observes, playing the role of the everyman, asking the questions the reader might have, while Holmes pieces together unspoken clues from the visitor's mannerisms alone. Key elements of this scene include the visitor's state. They are often pale, trembling, or sweating, their clothing slightly awry, signs of someone who has been through an ordeal. The mysterious case. Their story involves something seemingly impossible, a locked room mystery, a vanished person, a cryptic warning that hints at deeper intrigue. Holmes's immediate deductions. Before the visitor even finishes, Holmes may interrupt with an observation about their profession, recent travels, or hidden motives, startling both the guest and Watson. The hook. The case is presented with stakes. A life in danger, a scandal to be avoided, national security at risk, compelling Holmes to take action. This scene type is vital because it sets the tone for the entire story, drawing the reader into the enigma while showcasing Holmes's genius. It's a masterclass in suspense, character introduction, and the promise of an intellectual challenge. Whether the visitor is a nobleman, a frightened woman, or a skeptical policeman, their arrival at Baker Street marks the beginning of an adventure that only Sherlock Holmes can solve. The scene in which Sherlock Holmes investigates the home of a missing or imperiled diplomat is a masterclass in methodical deduction, atmospheric tension, and the subtle art of noticing what others overlook. This type of sequence is a staple of detective fiction, particularly in stories involving political intrigue, espionage, or high-stakes deception. When Holmes steps into the residence of a vanished ambassador, attaché, or foreign envoy, the setting itself becomes a silent witness, its objects, disturbances, and absences all whispering secrets to the keen-eyed detective. The diplomat's home is typically a place of order and refinement, a reflection of the occupant's status and meticulous nature. Yet, beneath the polished surface, something is amiss. Holmes, with Watson in tow, enters the space not as a mere visitor, but as an investigator attuned to the smallest deviations from normality. The study, often the heart of the mystery, is the first place Holmes examines. Here, the diplomat would have conducted private correspondence, stored sensitive documents, or perhaps received clandestine visitors. Holmes moves with deliberate precision, his gaze sweeping over the room like a scalpel dissecting the unseen. He notes the placement of furniture. Has a chair been shifted, suggesting a conversation or struggle? Are there indentations in the carpet, hinting at a hurried departure or the presence of an intruder? The detective runs a gloved finger along a desk, inspecting dust patterns that betray recent activity or unexpected stillness. A half-filled glass of brandy, gone stale but not yet evaporated, tells him the diplomat left abruptly the previous evening. A clock stopped at a particular hour may mark the time of the incident. Papers are of particular interest. A disordered stack, a torn corner of a document, or the absence of an expected file all speak volumes. Holmes might find a coded message slipped between the pages of a book, or a hastily scribbled note with phrases that seem innocuous but carry hidden meaning. The presence of a certain type of ink, the impression of handwriting left on a blotter, or even the way a pen has been left uncapped, each is a clue waiting to be deciphered. The detective's examination extends beyond the obvious. He studies the fireplace, sifting through ashes for the remnants of burned papers, their charred edges still legible enough to suggest their importance. A faint scent lingers in the air, an unusual tobacco perhaps, or a cologne not belonging to the diplomat, indicating a visitor. A smudge on a window pane, a scuff on the floorboards near a bookshelf, or a painting hanging slightly askew might reveal an attempted concealment or escape route. Watson, ever the faithful chronicler, observes in amazement as Holmes reconstructs events from these silent testimonies. The doctor might comment on the apparent normalcy of the room, only for Holmes to dismantle that assumption with a series of razor-sharp observations. "You see, Watson, but you do not observe," Holmes might chide, before revealing that the diplomat did not leave of his own accord, or that he was expecting someone he trusted only to be betrayed. The scene often culminates in a pivotal discovery, a hidden compartment in the desk containing a damning letter, a foreign object left behind by the kidnappers, or a blood stain disguised by the dark pattern of the rug. Holmes, piecing together the fragments, begins to form a theory, one that leads him closer to the diplomat's fate and the shadowy figures responsible. This type of investigation scene is not merely about gathering clues. It is a psychological duel between Holmes and the unseen adversary who believed they could outwit him. The diplomat's home, once a place of order and diplomacy, becomes a battleground of wits, where every detail matters and nothing is as it seems. By the time Holmes strides out the door, his mind already leaping ahead to the next phase of the chase, the audience is left in no doubt. The game is indeed afoot. The moment when Sherlock Holmes begins interviewing witnesses marks a crucial turning point in any investigation, a delicate dance between perception and deception, where every word spoken and unspoken holds potential significance. Unlike the methodical examination of physical clues, these encounters pulse with human unpredictability. Witnesses may lie without realizing it, omit crucial details out of fear, or misinterpret what they've seen entirely. Holmes, with his preternatural ability to read people, navigates these interactions like a conductor drawing hidden melodies from an orchestra. The settings for these interviews vary richly. A fog-draped street corner where a night watchman glimpsed something peculiar, the hushed back room of a club where servants speak reluctantly of their employers, or the cramped parlor of a nervous housekeeper wringing her apron in her hands. Each environment colors the testimony. A dock worker might blunt his words with gruff suspicion, while a society lady might lace hers with calculated omissions. Holmes tailors his approach, sometimes playing the sympathetic confidant, other times the intimidating interrogator, to pry loose the fragments of truth buried beneath layers of hesitation or deceit. What makes these scenes electrifying is their psychological tension. A witness's fleeting glance at a door, A sudden hesitation before answering, or an overly rehearsed detail all telegraph hidden meanings. Holmes listens not just to what is said, but how it's said. The tremor in a voice when a name is mentioned, the defensive crossing of arms, or the nervous tap of a finger against a teacup. Watson often observes in awe as Holmes dismantles alibis with a single pointed question, or lulls a reluctant witness into confession with seemingly casual chatter. The interviews also serve as a narrative mirror, reflecting the era's social hierarchies. A policeman might defer to Holmes with starstruck cooperation, while a street urchin, wise to the ways of being dismissed, demands coin or kindness before sharing what they've seen. There is something distinctly Sherlockian about the moment when the great detective pauses mid-investigation, lifts a pinch of forgotten ash from a tray, rolls it between his fingers, and inhales its scent with the reverence of a sommelier sampling a rare vintage. In stories where Holmes follows the tobacco clue, we witness not just his legendary attention to detail, but the very soul of his method, the belief that the smallest, most overlooked traces of human activity can unravel the grandest of mysteries. The scene typically unfolds in a space heavy with silence, a study, a crime scene, or the sitting room at Baker Street itself, where others see only detritus. Holmes sees a road map, a smudge of ash on a glove, a particular arrangement of cigarette ends in a saucer, or the faintest lingering aroma in a curtain's fabric becomes a portal into the habits, movements, and even the psyche of a suspect. The genius of this trope lies in its intimacy. Tobacco, after all, is a personal indulgence, a ritual as unique as handwriting. The way a man packs his pipe, the brand he favors, the carelessness with which he taps out the dottle, all these speak to his character, his origins, and his secrets. Consider the theatricality of Holmes in these moments. He might produce a magnifying glass to examine the cut of a cigar's wrapper, or, with the flourish of a chemist, compare samples under a microscope, rattling off obscure names like trichinopoly or shag to a baffled Watson. His monologues on the subject are less lectures than revelatory performances, laying bare connections invisible to others. "Observe, Watson," he might say, holding a single recovered flake aloft. "This Latakia blend is imported exclusively through one London merchant, whose clientele includes exactly 3 men connected to our case. The mundane is transformed into the miraculous. But the tobacco clue is more than a party trick. It's a narrative linchpin. In one story, it might reveal that a supposed recluse had a visitor, his Persian slippers tobacco stash, depleted too quickly. In another, it could expose an impostor, the wrong ash in the fireplace of a man who claimed never to smoke. The residue becomes a timestamp. This Virginia was fresh. The meeting occurred within the hour. A geographical marker. This is the peculiar shag, smoked in bohemian military circles. Or even a psychological tell. Only a deeply agitated man would grind out his pipe thus. Watson's role here is essential. His initial skepticism, "Surely, Holmes, you can't expect us to believe," gives way to astonished admiration, guiding the reader through the same journey from doubt to wonder. And when the trail leads to its quarry, the suspect startled into confession by Holmes's casual mention of his preference for Egyptian over Turkish, the satisfaction is immense. The tobacco clue, trivial as it may seem, becomes proof of Holmes's creed. The world is an open book for those who know how to read it. There exists in detective fiction a particular moment of alchemy, when scribbled ink on aged paper transforms from meaningless marks into a revelation that cracks a case wide open. The decoding of a cryptic note is not merely a plot device, it is a ritual, a duel of wits between the detective and an unseen adversary who believed their message would remain forever hidden. In the hands of Sherlock Holmes, these fragments of paper become living things, whispering secrets to those who know how to listen. The note always arrives at a crucial juncture, tucked in a dead man's waistcoat, slipped between the pages of a library book, or half burned in a fireplace where someone hoped its secrets would turn to ash. At first glance, it appears nonsensical, a jumble of numbers, a string of seemingly random words, or symbols that might be mistaken for a child's doodles. To the untrained eye, it is worthless. But to Holmes, it is a siren's call, a challenge flung down by a criminal mind that underestimated his brilliance. His approach is methodical, yet intuitive. He spreads the note on his desk at Baker Street, the firelight casting dancing shadows across its surface. Sometimes he employs physical tests, holding it to the light to reveal watermarks, rubbing a finger across the paper to feel the indentations of a nervous hand, or even tasting the ink to determine its origin. More often, it is the sheer force of his intellect that cracks the code. He recognizes patterns where others see chaos. The spacing of letters suggests a book cipher, the recurrence of certain numbers hints at dates, the odd capitalization points to an acrostic. The true magic lies not in the solution itself, but in the journey of discovery. As Holmes works, he murmurs half-formed thoughts aloud, allowing Watson and the reader to follow the labyrinthine paths of his mind. There are false starts, plausible interpretations that must be discarded when they don't quite fit. The tension builds until that electric moment when everything clicks into place and what seemed like gibberish reveals itself to be a blackmail demand, a death threat, or the location of a stolen treasure. These scenes resonate because they speak to our deepest desires, to find meaning in the meaningless, to uncover truths that others tried to bury. The decoded note does more than advance the plot. It exposes the arrogance of the villain who thought they could outsmart Holmes and reaffirms our faith in the detective's preternatural abilities. In a world that often feels chaotic and indecipherable, there is profound comfort in watching Sherlock Holmes prove that with enough observation and reason, no secret can stay hidden forever. The best of these moments linger in the memory long after the book is closed, not because of the information revealed, but because of what they show us about the beauty of puzzles and the human minds that solve them. Whether it's the dancing men's cipher or the Musgrave ritual, these notes remind us that language is never just language, and that every mark on a page tells a story, if only we have the wit to read it. There comes a moment in every great mystery when the clouds of confusion part with sudden, almost violent clarity. A moment when disparate clues snap together like puzzle pieces, when a single observation ignites the detective's mind with the white-hot certainty of truth. This is the break in the case, that electrifying turning point where the investigation transforms from meandering suspicion to focused pursuit. And no storyteller orchestrates this moment with more dramatic flair than Arthur Conan Doyle in his Sherlock Holmes tales. The break never comes through mere chance. It is the inevitable result of Holmes's meticulous groundwork, the tireless accumulation of facts, the careful sifting of contradictory testimonies, the quiet observation of details others dismissed as insignificant. Like a chemist waiting for a precise combination of elements to produce a reaction, Holmes works until the critical mass of evidence achieves intellectual critical mass. Then, often when least expected, perhaps during a casual stroll through Regent's Park or while idly tuning his violin, the spark comes. The revelation frequently manifests as a physical reaction in the great detective. His fingers might suddenly still above his violin strings. His gray eyes could flash with uncharacteristic animation. Sometimes he leaps to his feet with such abruptness that poor Watson startles, sending his teacup clattering. "Of course," Holmes might exclaim, or the more enigmatic, "The case becomes clear now in every particular," leaving Watson and the reader straining to comprehend what invisible thread has just woven everything together. What makes these moments so delicious is their duality. For Holmes, it represents complete understanding. For everyone else, utter bewilderment. The detective might cryptically reference some obscure botanical fact or an arcane point of European heraldry that holds the key to everything, demonstrating how his encyclopedic knowledge transforms trivial details into devastating evidence. The break often hinges on something previously overlooked: the absence of a dog's bark, the peculiar arrangement of furniture in a room, or the type of mud on a suspect's boots. These turning points carry an almost musical rhythm. The careful buildup of investigation suddenly crescendos into revelation. Holmes, now vibrating with nervous energy, typically becomes a whirlwind of activity, dispatching telegrams, calling for his revolver and traveling coat, or issuing urgent instructions to Scotland Yard. The languid pace of the investigation gives way to thrilling urgency as the break in the case sends the narrative hurtling toward its conclusion. Yet the genius of Conan Doyle's execution lies in how these moments simultaneously solve and deepen the mystery. While the break reveals the true shape of the crime, it often unveils even more shocking implications. A respected gentleman's double life, a criminal mastermind's audacious plan, or a tragedy hidden beneath layers of respectability. The moment of clarity doesn't simplify the case. It complicates it in more profound ways, raising the stakes as Holmes races to prevent some impending disaster. This narrative device taps into our fundamental love of eureka moments, those flashes of understanding that rearrange our perception of reality. In Holmes's world, as in ours, truth often hides in plain sight, waiting only for the prepared mind to recognize it. The break in the case reminds us that mysteries do yield to reason, that persistence is rewarded, and that the world, for all its chaos, operates by rules that genius can discern. It's the pivot where intellectual satisfaction and thrilling narrative momentum collide, and it's why, more than a century later, we still lean forward in our chairs when Sherlock Holmes suddenly sits bolt upright, his eyes alight with the fire of revelation. There comes a moment in the finest Holmesian tales when the great detective shifts from observer to architect, when, having patiently unraveled a mystery's threads, he begins to weave his own counterplot with equal cunning. The scene where Holmes sets his trap is not merely a tactical maneuver. It is theater, psychological warfare, and intellectual chess played at the highest level. Here, the hunter becomes the hunted, though the prey remains blissfully unaware until the trap's jaws snap shut. The setup is always deliberate, calibrated to exploit the villain's unique weaknesses. Holmes might dangle a piece of fabricated evidence, a counterfeit document, a carefully placed rumor, or a decoy witness, knowing the criminal's arrogance or greed will compel them to take the bait. The trap is never crude. It is a mirror held up to the antagonist's own methods, turning their schemes against them. A forger is undone by a forged clue. A blackmailer stumbles into a web of his own making. A murderer returns to the scene of the crime, only to find Holmes waiting, his silhouette framed in the doorway like an avenging specter. Timing is everything. Holmes orchestrates the moment with the precision of a conductor, ensuring his adversary's downfall coincides with the fullest exposure of their guilt. The trap often unfolds in a space heavy with symbolism, a gas-lit museum after hours, a deserted country house, or the very alley where the crime was first committed. Atmosphere is weaponized, shadows stretch unnaturally, footsteps echo with ominous weight, and the ticking of a clock or the rustle of a curtain reminds us that every second has been accounted for in Holmes' design. Watson, Lestrade, or another ally typically plays a crucial role, sometimes as unwitting camouflage, other times as the visible distraction that lulls the villain into false security. Holmes himself might adopt a disguise, not merely to conceal his identity, but to embody a character the criminal would underestimate: a doddering old bookseller, a disheveled loiterer, or a disinterested bystander. The performance is flawless because Holmes understands that the best traps are those where the quarry never suspects the hand guiding their steps until it is too late. When the moment of revelation comes, it is never with brute force, but with devastating intellectual clarity. A single sentence, "I believe you dropped this, Count von Kram," or the sudden illumination of a lamp exposing the criminal mid-act serves as the coup de grace. The real triumph is not the arrest itself, but the elegance with which Holmes proves his opponent's mind, for all its guile, was always one move behind. This narrative device thrills because it inverts the power dynamic. The trap is Holmes's ultimate demonstration that crime, no matter how elaborate, is ultimately a failure of imagination, and that justice in his hands is a work of art. The air grows thick with anticipation as the final confrontation between Holmes and his adversary approaches, not with the bluster of pistols at dawn, but with the quiet intensity of two masterminds circling each other in a battle of wits. This is the showdown, the crescendo of the detective's carefully orchestrated pursuit, where all the threads of deception, misdirection, and forensic brilliance converge into a single, electrifying moment of reckoning. The setting is never accidental. A shadow-laden drawing room, its heavy curtains drawn against prying eyes. A deserted warehouse by the docks, the scent of salt and rotting timber hanging in the air. The villain's own lair, where trophies of past crimes sit like grotesque decorations. These spaces become psychological battlegrounds, charged with the weight of everything that has led to this encounter. The very walls seem to lean in, bearing witness. Holmes enters the scene with the calm of a man who has already won, though his opponent does not yet realize it. There is no grandstanding, only the slight tightening of his lips, the sharpening of his gaze. The villain, by contrast, often reveals their hand through micro-expressions, a flicker of panic in the eyes, a tremor in the fingers that once dealt death so smoothly. The true power of the showdown lies in this imbalance of awareness. Holmes sees everything. The criminal, for all their cunning, is blind to the trap already sprung around them. Dialogue becomes a duel. A deceptively casual remark, "You've left your pipe ashes in 3 different crime scenes, Professor," lands like a hammer blow. Holmes' words are scalpel precise, each syllable dissecting the villain's carefully constructed facade. The criminal may attempt to bluff, to threaten, or even to appeal to a perverse camaraderie, as if Holmes, of all people, could ever admire their brilliance. But the detective's rebuttals are merciless, stripping away pretense layer by layer until only the ugly truth remains. Then, the pivot, the moment when intellectual victory transforms into physical consequence. Lestrade and the police emerge from their hiding places. A hidden door swings open to reveal the stolen goods. A previously overlooked piece of evidence, Holmes producing the damning letter, the telltale garment, the missing weapon, drops like a guillotine. The villain's collapse is often more psychological than physical. Watching Moriarty's smug superiority crumble into sputtering rage, or Irene Adler's defiant smirk soften into reluctant respect, is more satisfying than any hand-to-hand struggle. Yet the greatest showdowns linger in ambiguity. Sometimes the criminal escapes, leaving Holmes to stare into the fog with mingled frustration and admiration. Other times, justice arrives with a cost, an innocent life lost, a revelation that stains even the resolution. These endings remind us that Holmes's victories are never clean, never simple. The world he navigates is too morally complex for that. The showdown is not just about catching a criminal. It is about the collision of two worldviews, Holmes's unshakable belief in reason and order against the chaos of human greed and malice. When the detective finally says, "The game is up," it resonates beyond the immediate case. It is a declaration that no darkness, no matter how deep, can outmaneuver the light of relentless observation and indomitable will. And as the handcuffs click shut, or the villain's shadow melts into the London night, we are left with the thrill of having witnessed a mind operating at the peak of its powers, a reminder that justice in the right hands is the most thrilling spectacle of all. The climactic moment when Sherlock Holmes unveils the truth represents far more than a simple solution to a mystery. It is a carefully staged unmasking of reality itself, where facts transform into poetry and deduction becomes theater. This revelation scene follows an almost ritualistic structure in Conan Doyle's stories, serving as both intellectual payoff and moral reckoning. The detective's drawing room at 221B Baker Street becomes a makeshift courtroom, with Holmes occupying the roles of prosecutor, judge, and executioner all at once. These scenes begin with a deliberate gathering of participants, the suspects, the clients, often Inspector Lestrade or another police official, arranged like actors awaiting their cues. The atmosphere crackles with tension, the air thick with pipe smoke and unspoken accusations. Holmes typically positions himself near the fireplace, his lean frame casting elongated shadows on the wall, the flickering light accentuating his sharp features. He becomes not just a man explaining a solution, but a conjurer revealing how the trick was performed all along. What makes these revelations so compelling is their narrative structure. Holmes never simply states the answer. He reconstructs the crime as it happened, often starting from some seemingly insignificant detail everyone else overlooked: the absence of barking from the dog in Silver Blaze, the curious incident of the jelly in The Naval Treaty. His explanation unfolds like a symphony in 3 movements, first establishing the facts, then demonstrating their connections, finally arriving at the inevitable conclusion that leaves his audience stunned. The detective's voice remains calm, almost clinical, even as he delivers the most shocking disclosures. The reactions of those assembled provide the emotional counterpoint to Holmes's dispassionate logic. The guilty party may collapse into a chair, their face draining of color. An innocent suspect might weep with relief. Watson invariably expresses astonishment at some crucial deduction, while Lestrade alternates between professional admiration and wounded pride. These human responses ground the intellectual exercise in genuine drama, reminding us that behind every case lie real lives and lasting consequences. Yet the most powerful revelations often carry a sting of melancholy. Holmes frequently exposes not just crimes, but human tragedies. The decent man driven to desperation, the loving wife protecting her husband, the brilliant mind warped by obsession. In these moments, even the great detective's tone softens slightly. His victory feels less like triumph and more like the closing of a wound, that should never have been inflicted. The truth, once revealed, cannot be unknown, and this knowledge gives these scenes their haunting quality. The language of revelation in these scenes is worth noting. Holmes employs vivid metaphors, crimes as threads to be pulled, mysteries as tangles to be straightened, that transform abstract deduction into tangible imagery. His speeches build rhythmically, each sentence lay. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.